So my name is David Barnard. I work for the council on this programme. I don't actually work for the council. I work for an organisation called Groundwork East. We're our federation organisation under Groundwork UK, basically an environmental social charity. So, as you probably are all aware, because I think most of you, by looking at your badges, I hope I'm getting right here because my eyesight isn't that great. Most of you work for councils. Yeah. Okay, so you're probably very, very aware of the emergency declarations that councils have made about their plans to reduce to net zero by 2030, 2035, 2040, whatever. Obviously for Suffolk and the surrounding other councils, Baber I think is one of them, Mid Suffolk, etc., West Suffolk, that basically made it 2030. So they're putting it out there, getting there on the roadmap first. So essentially, in terms of that action plan, so in terms of Suffolk's climate emergency declaration to this 2030 target to net zero, they've looked at the roadmap, basically how they're going to get there. And this chart, although it's not time scaled in the sense of how things are going to happen. It's just basically showing the progression of things that need to happen to get to net zero in that time of 2030. So the main thing at the start is essentially we're going to have a decarbonisation of the grid, which obviously helps reduce all the emissions from electricity use. Then we've got a number of different sectors that they're looking at. So what needs to be happening in domestic sector, the housing market, what needs to be happening in transport, what needs to be happening in industrial and commercial. And they've essentially broken it down to a couple of three areas. Energy efficiency, as you'll see, is always the first thing they're looking for. It's not the biggest thing, but it's like, really we need to have energy efficiency, reduce. And then there's other things that we can take on top of that. And fundamentally, as you've probably heard a lot today through the presentations and the other people who've got their stands and everything, about effectively decarbonisation of heat, decarbonisation of electricity, and using appropriate technologies. The challenge really from a council perspective, because the plan for 2030 is the whole, it's not just the council's emissions, the whole of Suffolk. So their real challenge is two things, I think. One, as it says on this particular chart, they've got going to have essentially a residual amount of carbon coming out of things like agriculture, which is incredibly hard to decarbonise. But also, I think the main thing that they're going to actually find challenging is getting people on board. Because this isn't their plan, it's everybody's plan, because it's decarbonisation of Suffolk. So they've got to get everyone on board, and that's really where the strategy should be taking them. And that really fits in with everyone's commitment. We should all be working to that in regard. So the big questions are that obviously people coming out, you've heard them today, well, what does it mean? What does net zero mean? What does, where do we start? Is it even possible? Is this realistic? Well, hopefully today you've got inspired. People are saying, yes, it is. But it's not easy. It's definitely not going to be easy, but it is. And it's about that engagement and really about how the plan fits with let's say the key motivations. I think we heard Peter say earlier about getting momentum, getting people on board. So in this presentation, I've got just got a couple of examples of some organisations that have done things, and then obviously we'll have some questions. So one of the organisations that has been very proactive is I could have chosen probably loads, but this particular company, Precision Marketing. Basically, they do what they say on the tin. They're a marketing organisation. They print materials and things like that. And to them, carbon reduction makes business sense. I think we've heard that a lot today. It just makes business sense about how they can reduce their emissions. And these are some of the ways they've been doing it. And they've done a lot of work through a particular program that I'll come on to mention later on. But this is in relation to them being a member of the Carboncharter. I don't know if it's an organisation, it's been mentioned a couple of times today. Essentially the Carboncharter is something that was set up by the council, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And so they are a gold charter member. So that indicates that they've done a lot, because there's 3 standards: gold, silver, bronze. Again, I'll come on to that in a moment. But they are a gold charter member, so that just shows they are up there and have been for a while, being on what they've been doing. So I'm not going to read through all the slides. You can just see that as easily as I can. Another organisation, completely different sector, Warren Services, so they actually are almost like a consultancy type service. They work with businesses, but they actually deliver, obviously, in their own right. They do some manufacturing and things like that, if I remember them correctly. I haven't worked with them personally, but I think that's their main gist of what they do. But again, another Gold Charter member. So they've been in this for a long time. In fact, I think they were on a presentation not that long ago that the Suffolk County Council did a webinar, and I think they were invited along. And so you might have seen one of them on there saying what they've been doing. Apologies, I don't really know much about that business. I say I've picked this presentation up at the last second, so someone's thrown it at me. So I apologise for that. So yeah, Carboncharter. What's it about? So effectively, the Carboncharter was set up by Suffolk County Council over 10 years ago now, I believe it was, and they have expanded it. So as part of a program called the Be Angler program, which is going to be probably on my next slide or two, they've expanded into Norfolk. And so there's two charters, essentially. They've got the Suffolk Charter and they've got the Norfolk Charter, but they're essentially one and the same, it's just branded slightly different. The aims of the charter are very much based on this principle of gold, silver or bronze. So bronze, pretty much you're starting your journey. You may have not done anything at all. You may not have even heard of carbon footprinting. So you have no idea whatsoever. So you're just starting out and you can get some assistance to do that. Silver, you've been doing it for a little while. You've got some idea, you've got some data, you've been doing some things and you can evidence it. And that's really what that's about. And that's why the silver, they're trying to look for at least a 10% reduction in how much energy, carbon you've saved over the assessment period, which is generally 1 to 2 years. And then gold is that you are a very proactive business. You've been out there, and it's actually more not just about the carbon footprinting, not just about business activities in terms of internal processes, but it's about actually engagement, external process, how you work with suppliers, how you get them on board and work with suppliers that you say to them, well, what are your green credentials? And so you're doing that engagement with them on that sort of high level. It may even entail some community involvement. How much are you doing in the communities? It might be you do litter picks or go plant trees, how much you work with your staff, etc. So it's that much broader view, and therefore you become an exemplar type organisation because it's not just always internal focusing. And so it's quite a high standard, quite a challenging standard. Essentially, it was designed for small and medium-sized enterprises in the recognition that a lot of businesses of that size would struggle to necessarily meet the ISO, the ISO standards or the British standards that are available, both in terms of money, cost, how much it would cost to get into those schemes, and also time commitments. So this was really trying to give something that was really powerful, but not so intensive in terms of the amount of effort and money that was required. The other things about the Charter is fundamentally a networking organisation set arrangement, so that it's really trying to encourage good practice. So there's an opportunity where if you join the network, they hold events to try and do a bit of networking, sharing, and best practice learning, that sort of thing across the piece. And so it's really, that's the key thing about getting this engagement as well, getting like-minded people, like-minded organisations to work together and have a view of things. Obviously they're not collaborating on projects, but just saying this is how we've done it, the lessons we learned, the good things, the bad things, etc., etc. So that's what the main aims of the Charter. Also, there's now recently, as you probably might be aware, Suffolk Council have made a procurement ask. So when they now ask for tenders to come in for purchasing of equipment or supplies or whatever they're buying into the organisation themselves, they're now saying, well, what green standards have you got? And as part of that recognition, they are now saying, oh yes, the Charter is a recognised award. We will accept that as part of our procurement ask. And the reason for that is that it's not just something the council set up. It's not just a council scheme. The Charter isn't just them coming up with this accreditation process, but it's actually gone through the Environment Agency as well. So they're one of the lead organisations that have supported the Carboncharter right from its inception back in the day, and therefore it's sort of externally accredited to them, and therefore it has that weight behind it of the Environment Agency backing it up as a a viable and good system for environmental management accreditation. So in terms of the charter, what is it looking at? And I think I've just mentioned the words there. It's looking at the whole of the impacts of your business. It's actually looking at that, let's say, not just the energy, the carbon footprint, but the broader aspects of your environmental impacts. I've probably said all that, actually. That's my next slide. Okay, so it's about understanding what your impacts are, and I say there's a lot of support around that, and so that's what the council are really trying to do. They're trying to encourage organisations to get involved in the charter, and so there's a lot of good information. They do have this the website, carboncharter.org, and on there they've actually made quite a lot of information freely available to organisations to hook up with. So there's some template information, guides, etc. And fundamentally, if you are a charter member, you get this free consultancy service. I'll have to caveat free because essentially it is free to certain organisations, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But some of it now is also paid for, so it's not always free. But generally it has always in the past been free until quite recently. So this is a scheme actually that I particularly work on, which is, a service we deliver on behalf of the council, Suffolk County Council particularly, or Norfolk Council, on the Be Anglia programme. It's a business-focused programme. It's aimed at, again, small and medium-sized enterprises. I don't know what happened there. Aimed at small and medium-sized enterprises, subject to ERDF funding. I think because I'm waving that about. Subject to ERDF funding rules. So there are some eligibility criteria that come into play, but essentially it's small and medium-sized enterprises. In terms of what we do, we're an advisory service. We can provide free support advice to organisations, but fundamentally we're trying to get people to do things. So we offer grant funding support, and grant funding support can be up to 40% of a eligible project cost. And we essentially do pretty much anything that will reduce carbon emissions in support of grant funding. So we can, typical examples would be people want to change out their lighting to LED, we can help support that. People want to change out their equipment, maybe to be more efficient, energy efficient equipment. Solar PV, that sort of thing, we can help. There is one or two things that we can't support. What we did quite a few years ago was decide that we were not going to support any fossil fuel improvements. So we were trying to, because of the decarbonisation, we're trying to move people from fossil fuels onto electric. So we're going to the transition from fossil fuel to electricity, so that we're not into upgrading gas boilers. If people want to change their gas boiler for a more efficient boiler, they won't get our support. We also don't do hybrid vehicles for that very same reason, because it's essentially a fossil fuel engine with a battery, so we don't do fossil fuels. So there are a couple of things that we don't do, but essentially pretty much everything else, if it's going to save some carbon, businesses can come to us for potential grant funding support if they are an eligible organisation. It does say on my slide there, I noticed there that it says the inquiries up to 2021. The reason that I think is there is fundamentally the project ends June next year. So the Be Anglia project ends 30th of June 2022, but that's essentially all the money's got to have been given out to all the applicants by then, which means in process terms, what the funders are now starting to tell us is we need all applications to essentially be approved by the end of the year, hence inquiries by the end of 2021, for things to be installed early part next year to then be able to claim back their monies by June 30th next year. So that's why I think they're looking at that time scale. It doesn't mean they can't get things next year, but I think just the way it works, getting stuff installed can take a bit of time and getting all that in. But in terms of the process, it's a bit like a cashback scheme in terms of the grant, the way the grant works. So you have to get approval first. We can't pay for anything retrospectively. You get approval from the funders. You then, as an organisation, would install the measures that you've asked the funding to be done, as you would have done anyway. So you go ahead and get quotes and all that, put that to us. Then you get the works done, and then you claim the monies back at the end. if that makes sense. So I'll recap that, because I don't know if I muddled that up. But basically, you come to us with an idea, you say, I want to do something, we assist you in getting the approval, you then get approval hopefully for the amount of grant funding that you're able to get. You would then go and install it as an organisation, and then when it's installed and you can evidence that it's been installed, you make your claim back. So everything has to be paid for up front, and then you get your money's back at the end. Hence that deadline of 30th of June 2022 when the monies has to be paid out. That's it. So that's my last slide. So that's the two main programs that I've mentioned, the Be Anglia program and the Carboncharter. In terms of, say, the Be Anglia, we do offer the Carboncharter for free, which is why I say in most cases it is hopefully for free, as part of the service under the Be Anglia program. So if you're an eligible organisation under B, you can get the Carboncharter initial accreditation for free. But if you're not an eligible organisation, then I say there may be a cost. Thank you very much. That was probably a very quick gap through. Is there any? Well, I think there are questions. Yes, please do.
Very good question. Yeah. So in terms of, you mentioned the Carboncharter through Be Anglia in terms of an accreditation. Do you have to have a grant through Be Anglia to then get Carboncharter accreditation paid for by Be Anglia?
No.
Or,
they're totally independent of each other.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so you can have a grant, you can have a charter, or you can have them both.
Okay, great, thank you.
What is the criteria for an eligible business?
How long we got? Okay, so there's certain sectors that we can't work with. So fundamentally, there's some sort of golden rules as to non-eligible sectors. So they would be things like we can't work with steel industries, we can't work with synthetic industries, we can't work with big energy users effectively, so like shipbuilding, those sort of things. We can't work with statutory services, so that's councils or things like that, health, education, those services that be delivered effectively on behalf of the government, even if it's in the private sector. So if you've got a private dentist, they still can't get funding or get support through Be Anglia because essentially it's a statutory service they're delivering on behalf of. So there are a number of rules. Agriculture we can't support, primary production of food, marketing or delivery of. So there are definitely some ERDF no-goes, I'm afraid.
And charities and not
charities, CIOs, sole traders, yes, they're all come under the SME banner. I think it said on one of the slides, maybe not, I can't remember, but the threshold on employees, so you can't have more than 250 full-time equivalent employees, so 249 full-time equivalents makes you an SME. Turnover and balance sheet are either or, so you can have one of them above or below, but as long as one is below these thresholds, you're able to be possibly eligible. So 43 million euros in terms of balance sheet per year, or 50 million euros on your turnover. So if you're above those, you're not an SME, so therefore you wouldn't get support through B.
Can I ask if you've had applications from landowners or farmers?
No, because we can't do farming, although we can support. So can't do agriculture.
Okay.
Because the general rule is if they can get support through other mechanisms, then they can't get support through us.
I mean, certainly their financing has changed this year for farmers because we've come out of the European Union and they're without that support. Oh, that's a shame, actually. What about pubs and things like that?
Yes, pubs. We've done lots of pubs.
I'm a councillor, so I'm interested in what I can encourage my residents to do.
Yeah, so if you I say pretty much everything. I'm going to say there are some no-goes, I'm afraid, and then most of them are listed on our website, the Be Anglia website, and it does tell you there.
All right.
So I've tried to give you an overview today, but there is some information on there, and if you need more information, I'm happy to help you. But we have got some examples. If you are able to spend some time, I've got a stand in the main atria and show you some of the examples we have worked with, and certainly public houses are places we have worked with a lot. Yeah.
It's a shame about the farmers, actually, because they've all been trying to diversify because of the changes in their financial support from Europe, and they're struggling actually. It just seems a shame that.
Yeah, so if it's a diversified business, and we're getting into detail now. So if it's a diversified business and it's a small or medium-sized enterprise in its own right, in other words, it's got its own autonomy, so it's got its own accounts, its own legal arrangements, even though it might be a farming structure, the parent might have been a farming or it might be a subsidiary of, if they are sufficiently large enough in their income to exceed what the farming is making, they might be eligible. It's a really weird rule. So we have to look at the economics of it. But most farms are basically, the primary business is the farming, and they've got a sub-business, and therefore that sub-business is much smaller. Yeah, they're much smaller, and therefore they're swamped by their financial income from the farm.
So really the advice is for them to, if I was speaking with them, say to go on your website, and that would explain perhaps what they could.
It will say agricultural primary production is not supported.
Well, in a rural community, it's a bit difficult then, isn't it?
I don't know.
I think you provided the clue. I think if the hospitality diversification is larger than the original farm, then it qualifies.
Which some of
It
them
may
do.
qualify.
Yeah.
It may qualify.
They've got camping and
Yeah.
restaurants and food shops and things.
And their energy supply has to come directly into that part of the business. So if it's fed off it, so if you've got a caravan park on the side of your house, then that's a domestic resident energy. So we can't help them because it's domestic energy. So I say that's why eligibility rules are how long we got. It sounds straightforward at high level, but actually when you get into detail, it can get quite complex. But the point of it is, in general terms, if you've got anybody that you want support for, just come to us and we can help, because we will weed out and sort out and try and work all this through for them to say yes or no to them.
So you're funded by the tail end of European funding, and that's the reason you're stopping in June next year. Yeah.
Pretty much.
And so, have you had any guidance from national government that they're going to replace?
Can I take the Sixth Amendment on it? Whatever it is. No, I've heard nothing. So as far as I know, the programme ends June. But I'm hoping, obviously, with all the government commitments, that they will be making announcements about ongoing funding. But we've heard nothing.
Sorry to